Artificial intelligence is about to make teaching a better profession. For more than a century, schools have been organized around one simple assumption. If students need instruction, they depended on a knowledgeable adult delivering it to them. That assumption shaped almost everything about modern school. Today, it no longer does. Once I saw that, I started looking at the teaching profession in an entirely different way. The future will be about freeing educators to spend more of their time coaching, mentoring, encouraging, and helping children grow into remarkable young adults. In short, teachers will become guides. If you're a teacher, a school leader, or you're building a micro school, this episode may change the way you think about your career path. Welcome to Guide School, where we explore what school can become in the age of AI. I'm Heather Clayton-Staker, and every show I share what I'm learning as we build guide model schools around the world. What's working, what's failing, and what the future of teaching, learning, and childhood can look like. Let's jump in. Hi everyone, today's episode has been on my mind for a long time. Why teachers should become guides. I want to begin by saying something that I feel very strongly about. The teaching profession deserves our sincerest gratitude. That probably sounds like an obvious thing for someone in education to say, but it's important to begin there because whenever people start talking about artificial intelligence or the future of education, teachers often feel like they're the target of the conversation. They hear predictions that AI is going to replace them, that conventional classrooms are becoming obsolete, or that the profession that they've devoted their lives to is somehow in flux. It's understandable that many educators hear those conversations as criticism. That isn't how I see it at all. Some of my favorite people in the world are teachers. I attended public school myself at University High School in Irvine, California, and I received a rigorous education from people who genuinely cared about their students and got me into Harvard. My own children have attended wonderful public schools as well. They've been shaped by remarkable classroom teachers, football coaches, swim coaches, principals, counselors, and music teachers, people who invested thousands of hours helping them become who they are today. When I was in high school, I had the unusual opportunity to serve as the student member of the California State Board of Education. 1 week every month, I traveled throughout California visiting schools before attending our board meetings in Sacramento. I visited elementary schools, high schools, charter schools, continuation schools, even juvenile detention centers. Everywhere I went, I met educators who were working incredibly hard on behalf of children. Their jobs were so obviously demanding and exhausting, but they were there because they believed young people deserve every opportunity to succeed. More recently, my own family has spent many years in Dripping Springs, Texas, where our children have attended Dripping Springs ISD on and off. I've become deeply appreciative of everything a well-run public school system like in Dripping Springs can offer a community. I love pulling up to the middle and high school before sunrise to drop my boys off for football or cross-country practice and seeing coaches already waiting in the parking lot, greeting these sleepy teenagers by gruff name. I love watching students choose from advanced placement courses, welding, theater, orchestra, football, choir, floral design, and dozens of other opportunities that simply wouldn't exist without a community willing to invest in its schools. When I think about conventional education, I don't think with cynicism. I think with gratitude. The conventional classroom has helped solve some of the greatest challenges societies have ever faced. How to educate millions of children simultaneously and well enough that they can read, think, and contribute, and find jobs in a modern economy. That system has done an extraordinary amount of good work in this world, and it's important that we acknowledge that before we talk about what might come next. So if you're listening today as a teacher, I hope you hear this first. This episode is not about replacing teachers. It's about an unexpected opportunity for educators who are curious enough to help invent the next chapter of the profession. Today, I want to make 3 arguments. First, that becoming a guide is one of the smartest professional decisions an educator can make over the next decade. Second, that guiding is one of the most fulfilling professions you can imagine. And third, that guides have an outsized opportunity to change the course of a child's life. So let's begin with why I think the profession itself is inevitably changing. I've spent the past several years visiting guide model schools, launching new ones, and most recently, living here in Indonesia while helping build a small micro school called Zero School. The school founder named it Zero School because he's helping to create a zero waste, highly environmentally sustainable environment here on the island. And so zero is part of that zero waste ethic. These experiences have convinced me that we're living through one of the most significant shifts in the history of education. Interestingly, I don't think the shift is artificial intelligence itself. AI is simply accelerating something much deeper that's been quietly changing since the early 2000s. I've started describing that change with the simple phrase, the scarcity has moved. Here's what I mean. For most of human history, the primary reliable source of instruction, apart from a book, was a knowledgeable adult. If you wanted to learn algebra, someone had to teach you algebra. If you wanted to study chemistry, your school needed a chemistry teacher. If there wasn't anyone nearby who could teach you French, then French simply wasn't available to you. The limiting factor was access to expertise. Schools evolved around that reality. The classroom, the grade level, the bell schedule, the teacher standing at the front of the room, those weren't arbitrary traditions. They were elegant solutions to a world in which instruction was scarce. If one knowledgeable adult could teach 25 or 30 or 35 students at once, that was an extraordinary improvement over having no teacher at all. Students will always need instruction. That is not changing. They'll always need a way to encounter new ideas, to wrestle with difficult concepts, to practice new skills, to receive feedback, and ultimately achieve mastery. Learning has always required instruction, and it always will. What's changing is where the instruction comes from. For the first time in history, students have access to instructional tools that can meet them almost exactly where they are. Adaptive learning software can identify what a student already understands, diagnose where they're struggling, recommend the next lesson, provide immediate feedback, and patiently continue until the concept is mastered. Now, suddenly, artificial intelligence is making those systems more capable every month. It isn't perfect. I use these tools every day and I see their limitations, but I also don't think there's any serious question about the direction they're heading. For most of history, the primary reliable source of instruction was a knowledgeable adult. That is no longer true. And once I discovered that, I realized something else. The scarcity has moved. Instruction is becoming increasingly abundant. Explanations are becoming increasingly abundant. Personalized practice is becoming increasingly abundant. What remains scarce is something entirely different. The scarce resource isn't explanations anymore. It's someone who knows a child well enough to help that child grow. That's the scarcity. Someone who knows the child well enough to help the child grow. This is why so many teachers feel like now they're charged with being almost like guidance counselors on top of delivering instruction. Society wants teachers to coach, nurture, and sometimes almost even parent each child. That's where the scarcity is in the system today. That single realization has fundamentally changed the way I think about the future of teaching. Once I began thinking about education this way, another question immediately followed. If instruction is becoming increasingly abundant, what does it mean for the teaching profession? I think it means the teaching profession evolves. One of the reasons, in fact, that I've become so optimistic about the future is that this isn't the first time education has reinvented itself. Schools have always reflected the realities of the world around them. As societies grew larger and more interconnected, we needed ways to educate millions of children. Also, school buses made new things possible. We grouped students by age because it made instruction manageable. We divided the day into subjects and rang bells because it allowed specialists to teach many classes efficiently. We built larger schools and bused children from rural communities because access to knowledgeable adults mattered more than proximity, thanks to those buses. Colleges of education emerged because we needed to prepare enough teachers to meet an enormous societal need, and we wanted to standardize. None of those decisions were arbitrary. They were thoughtful responses to the constraints of the time. And given those constraints, the conventional classroom was a remarkably elegant solution. That's why I don't look at the history of education and see failure. I see one of humanity's great achievements. We built a system that dramatically expanded literacy, numeracy, scientific understanding, and opportunity for millions of children. That accomplishment deserves our respect. But every design is optimized for the constraints that exist when it's created. When those constraints change, the design eventually changes with them. And that's where we are today. The constraint that shaped modern schooling was the knowledgeable, highly qualified teachers that were scarce. Parents needed to maneuver for their children to access them, whether by sending them on a bus or moving them to be in the right school districts. Today, increasingly, high-quality instruction is not as scarce. A student can receive a beautifully explained math lesson at exactly the right level. They can pause it, replay it, ask follow-up questions, and practice until they understand. AI can often identify misconceptions faster than a human can, and adaptive software can adjust the level of difficulty in real time. So instruction hasn't disappeared, but it has become dramatically easier to access. That's why, although I don't think AI is replacing teachers, I do think it's freeing teachers. It's freeing them to spend more time to do the work that only human beings can do, not replacing them, freeing them. That's a way better way of looking at it. One of my sons has been studying French while we've been here in Indonesia. When we returned to Texas, his high school there doesn't offer French. 20 years ago, that probably would have been the full end of the story. Today, it doesn't have to be. He could continue learning through AI-powered learning apps and virtual tutors and Preply.com, where he's been connecting with a tutor who lives in Mexico City, a live tutor. Geography no longer determines where he could access great French instruction. But will Dripping Springs High School allow him to earn credit for French classes taken in an alternative way from traditional instruction? And pray tell, how many district personnel would I need to talk to make that happen for my son? French instruction is abundant, but at this son's high school, it's walled off. There's a disconnect there that one day, eventually, Dripping Springs Independent School District will need to face. The design constraint against taking French has dropped, but the district has not caught up to that yet in a readily available way for all subjects for most parents. Guide School is helping the school in Indonesia here use AI to identify students' knowledge gaps and recommend exactly what they should learn next. Our system, we call ours Core Engine, and it can identify the prerequisite concept that a student needs to learn and then point them to the exact right set of targeted lessons. It's all this cool automated system that our director of technology has spearheaded. That's the kind of work that would have taken a teacher an extraordinary amount of time just a few years ago. When I step back and look at all of this together, it's clear that the teaching profession is facing a dramatic change marker. The educators of the future won't be defined primarily by the quality of their lesson plans. They'll be defined by the quality of their relationships. How will they coach? How will they motivate? How will they notice? By how well they challenge students to attempt things that they didn't think were possible. By how well they help young people discover strengths they didn't know they possessed. By how well they prepare them for adulthood. That's the work of a guide. The next evolution of the teaching profession. And that's why I don't think teachers should fear this future. I think they should be the first in line to fill its jobs. If this idea resonates with you and you're wondering what the guide profession actually looks like day to day, we've created a few different ways to explore it. The first is our self-paced From Teacher to Guide course, developed in partnership with Arizona State University and the Clayton Christensen Institute for Disruptive Innovation. In about 15 hours, you'll learn the core mental models, daily routines, and systems that guides use. If today's episode is sparking your curiosity, that's the best place for your school's innovation team or for you personally to begin. You can learn more at guide.school/ASU. For schools that are ready to use the AI-powered academic behind the guide model, we've created Core Engine. I've told you about it. We're using it here. We're sharing it with others. It's like a buyer's consortium. We help schools choose and procure high-quality learning apps, simplify student logins, generate personalized weekly goal trackers available right there on your dashboard for print or digital use, and use AI to recommend exactly what each student should learn next. Our goal is to make the core academic block turnkey to implement so your guides can spend more time doing the deeply human work I've been talking about. That's at guide.school/engine. If you're ready to master the craft of guiding alongside educators from around the world, take a look at our Foundational Guide certification coming up soon in Nashville, Tennessee. It's a deluxe hybrid program that begins online with some self-paced work mixed with Zoom calls and culminates with a fabulous in-person intensive retreat where we practice the art of guiding while enjoying delicious food and fun. You can find that at guide.school/foundations. Yesterday, I had one of those little moments that reminded me why I love guiding so much. One of our students was working on multiplying fractions and he got stuck on cross-canceling. He looked up at me with that expression that says, "Can you just explain it to me?" And I could have. It probably would have taken me 2 or 3 minutes. I could have grabbed a whiteboard, worked through an example, and sent him on his way. But instead, I pulled up a short YouTube tutorial that explained cross-canceling beautifully. He wasn't excited about that idea at all. He really wanted me to teach him. So I made him a deal. I said, if you can learn this from tools you have within your reach without me explaining it, I'll give you credit for a 20 XP on your goal tracker. He thought about it for a second and decided it was worth a try. A few minutes later, he came back grinning. He'd figured it out, and I was delighted that he had learned how to cross-cancel fractions. Any tutor or teacher would be. That's satisfying. But something else happened that was just as important. He learned that he could use a modern learning tool to teach himself something difficult. That's why I've started thinking about the double joy of guiding. The first joy is watching a student master a concept. But the second joy is watching that student become more capable of learning independently the next time they get stuck. That's a different kind and a second source of satisfaction. In a conventional classroom, we often feel successful because we have a great explanation. But in the guide model, we feel successful because students become less dependent on our explanations over time. They leave us more resourceful than they arrived. That's the guide model. That's the guide's goal. A guide succeeds when students no longer need the guide for yesterday's problem. So a guide doesn't teach students. A guide helps students become increasingly capable of teaching themselves. That doesn't mean they stop needing adults. Quite the opposite. As students become more independent academically, guides have more time to challenge them, encourage them, coach them, and help them tackle bigger and more meaningful problems. So a guide doesn't simply teach students. A guide helps students become increasingly capable of teaching themselves. That, to me, is one of the most beautiful shifts happening in education. Here's the third reason that teachers should become guides. Once students begin taking greater ownership of instruction, something remarkable happens to the adult's day. The guides start spending less time delivering information and more time delivering people. I said that. What I meant was the guides start spending less time delivering information and more time developing people. When I walk through Zero School, I'm walking beside students, kneeling down next to them at their desks and asking them how things are going, looking over their shoulders as they explain something they've just discovered, or challenging them to push a little farther than they think they can. Our one-on-one check-ins have become some of my favorite moments of the day. Sometimes we're talking about math. Sometimes we're talking about friendships and who you're sitting with at lunch. Sometimes we're talking about football or the architecture project we've been working on in the afternoons. Yesterday, I problem solved with one of the students about her tooth, this cute little 7-year-old, because there's no dentist on our island and her tooth was really hurting her. Those conversations simply can't happen as often when a teacher is responsible for delivering every lesson. I've become increasingly convinced that this is where the profession is headed, not away from children, toward them. The guide model doesn't ask, did I get through today's lesson? Here, the guide asks, How is this child growing? And that's a more interesting question. And it's a much more fulfilling profession. There's one more reason I believe so deeply in the guide model. One of my favorite books about education is How Children Succeed by Paul Tough. One of the ideas that has stayed with me for years is that a single dependable adult can dramatically rewire a traumatized child's personality and change the trajectory of a child's life. I've seen that happen. I've heard personal testimony from a superintendent at Lindsay Unified Public Schools who has said that he refuses to give up on students that other people have quietly assumed would never catch up and weren't really able to learn. I've seen it at Acton Academy, where guides contractually commit to the belief that every child is a genius with a calling to change the world. I've seen it at Alpha School, where guides must pledge to view students as limitless. And I've seen it here at Zero School. There are students who arrived believing that they weren't math people. Others struggled with confidence. Others became frustrated so easily that they were ready to quit after the first obstacle. Given enough time, enough encouragement, enough coaching, and enough carefully chosen challenges, they have been changing the stories that they tell themselves because they've experienced success. The more I guide, the less I believe in lost causes. I think many students have simply been mismatched with the instructional modality that they've received, the pace that they were expected to keep, or the amount of individual attention available to them. The guide model creates something precious. It creates relational bandwidth. Instead of spending nearly every minute preparing lessons, delivering lessons, grading lessons, and reteaching lessons, guides recover hours that they can invest in one thing that has always changed children's lives: relationships. Knowing students well enough to notice when they're discouraged, celebrating progress they don't yet recognize, seeing gifts that haven't fully emerged, refusing to lower expectations when life gets difficult, believing in children long enough that they eventually begin believing in themselves. You might hear the firecrackers. I don't know why there's firecrackers going off on our island right now, but if you're hearing those in the background, there are. But the guide calling, helping children believe long enough in themselves that they eventually begin genuinely believing in themselves, that is the highest calling of the educator profession. Helping them discover that they're capable of doing hard things, helping them become increasingly independent, helping them imagine a future they couldn't yet see. If that's where education is heading, then teachers shouldn't be worried. We're living through one of the most exciting moments in the history of the profession. For generations, schools were designed around the scarcity of instruction. Today, the scarcity has moved. Instruction is becoming increasingly abundant, which means that the most valuable educators will be those who can do what only human beings have ever been able to do: know children, challenge them, encourage them, believe in them. A guide doesn't teach students. A guide helps students become increasingly capable of teaching themselves, and in so doing may change the course of a child's life. When I step back and look at everything we've talked about, I can begin to imagine a very different future for your school. I can imagine your school where students experience extraordinary academic growth each morning because they're learning at exactly the right level with instruction that's personalized to their needs. Then, because those core academics have become so much more efficient, they spend their afternoons outdoors, learning to farm, creating businesses, building robots, rehearsing for theater productions, mastering sports, caring for animals, serving their communities, learning trades, or discovering talents they never knew they had. I can witness for you that this isn't a fantasy. I am beginning to see it all over the world. The beautiful thing about the guide model is that it isn't limited to one type of school. It can flourish in the most well-resourced communities where students have beautiful campuses, MacBooks, and gourmet catered lunches. It can also flourish in communities with very few material resources. Give children just dependable adults who basically show up every day and believe in them and coach them and love them. These can maybe even be grandparents or volunteer missionaries. Give them reliable internet, a laptop, and access to high-quality learning apps. Those children can then have the same opportunity to learn at their own pace and discover what they're capable of. Most schools will fall somewhere in between. I can imagine districts like Dripping Springs Independent School District continuing to offer outstanding athletics, fine arts, career and technical education, and advanced placement courses while redesigning what happens inside the classroom walls. Imagine every student learning through an academic experience that's personalized, efficient, deeply motivating, and paired with extraordinary one-on-one coaching from guides who know them well. Those schools will become increasingly and incredibly compelling places to learn and incredibly compelling places for parents to want to send their children. Families today have more educational choices than ever before. Micro schools, charter schools, homeschooling, and hybrid models are all experimenting with new designs. Rather than seeing that as a threat, the incumbent system, meaning existing school districts and long-established private schools, could choose to see it as an invitation. Every school, public and private, now has an opportunity to rethink its design from first principles. The schools that embrace that opportunity will be positioned to compete with the changing landscape. They'll help define what excellent education looks like in the decades ahead. And that's why I'm so optimistic about the guide profession. We're watching one of the most exciting moments in the history of the teaching profession. If these ideas resonate with you, I'd encourage your school to form a small innovation team and work through our Arizona State University course, From Teacher to Guide, Leading AI-Powered Learning in Classrooms. We created it together with Arizona State University, the Clayton Christensen Institute, and Guide School to help educators thoughtfully redesign school for this new era. You can enroll at guide.school/ASU. And if you're ready to build the kind of AI-powered academic engine we've been using at Zero School, with personalized goal trackers available every week for your students, updated every week, carefully curated learning apps, single sign-on, and AI-assisted recommendations for what each student should learn next, take a look at Core Engine at guide.school/engine. For the most connection and in-person fun, join me in Nashville for our Foundational Guide Retreat. Spots are going fast. Guide.school/foundations. The future educator is a guide, and I can't wait for you to experience this dazzling new profession for yourself. Thanks for listening. Subscribe to Guide Schooling on the YouTube channel to never miss an episode. You can also get field notes from me by signing up for my emails at guide.school/contact. You'll get on the list. If you like this show, please give it a thumbs up and a follow. That small effort from you helps spread the word about how to improve teaching and learning for the almost 2 billion children who need a better model. I'll see you next time.